The stagecoach driver's body lay crumpled in the sand, 3 arrows protruding from his back, and Eleanor Jenkins knew she had perhaps an hour before the desert sun turned her into nothing more than bleached bones beside him. She had been traveling for 6 weeks from Boston to meet her intended husband in Santa Fe, a merchant named Marcus Wright, who had advertised for a mail-order bride in the newspaper back east. Eleanor had never seen his photograph, knew only what his letters promised: security, respectability, a home of her own. At 22 years old, with her parents dead and her brother's wife making it clear she was no longer welcome in their Philadelphia home, the prospect of becoming Mrs. Wright had seemed like salvation itself. Now, standing beside the overturned stagecoach somewhere in the New Mexico territory in the brutal summer of 1878, Eleanor understood that salvation was a fickle thing. The Apache raiders had come at dawn, appearing like ghosts from behind the red rock formations that dotted the landscape. They had taken the horses, the mail, and anything of value, leaving her alive for reasons she could not fathom. Perhaps they had not seen her, thrown as she was from the coach when it capsized. Perhaps they simply had not cared about one more white woman's fate. She had no water, no food, no idea which direction led to civilization. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast expanse of sand and scrub brush and merciless sky. Her traveling dress, proper and modest in Boston, was a prison of wool and cotton in this heat. Already she could feel sweat soaking through the fabric, moisture she could not afford to lose. Eleanor knelt beside the driver, whispering a prayer she half remembered from childhood, then began walking. She chose north, or what she thought was north, based on nothing more than instinct and desperation. Behind her, vultures were already circling. The first day was hell. The second day was worse. By the third day, Eleanor had stopped thinking in coherent thoughts, her mind reduced to the simple mechanics of placing one foot in front of the other. She had torn strips from her petticoat to wrap around her head, protection from a sun that beat down with physical force. Her lips had cracked and bled. Her tongue felt swollen, too large for her mouth. She thought about water constantly. The pump behind her brother's house in Philadelphia, where she would drink deeply on summer days. The rain that would drum against the windows of her childhood home, abundant and cool. The Atlantic Ocean, which she had crossed as a child when her family immigrated from England, more water than any person could ever need, and all of it undrinkable salt. On the fourth day, she collapsed. Her legs simply stopped working, folding beneath her like paper. She lay in the sand, watching the sky turn from blue to gold to deep purple as the sun set. This is how I die, she thought with strange clarity. Alone in the desert, unmourned, unburied. Marcus Wright would never know what became of his intended bride. Her brother would never know what became of his sister. She closed her eyes and waited for the end. That was when Graham Hunter found her. Graham had been tracking the Apache raiding party for 3 days, ever since they had hit the ranch where he worked, stealing horses and supplies. He was a 30-year-old cowboy, lean and weathered from years under the southwestern sun, with dark hair and green eyes that could spot movement at impossible distances. The rancher, old Tom Sullivan, had sent Graham after the raiders not for revenge but for the horses. They needed those animals to survive the coming season. But Graham had lost the trail yesterday, the tracks disappearing into rocky terrain where even his experienced eye could not follow. He had been about to turn back when he spotted the vultures, a dark spiral against the late afternoon sky. Vultures meant death, but death in the desert sometimes meant water nearby or supplies that could be salvaged. He urged his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, toward the circling birds. He found the stagecoach first, its wheels jutting up at odd angles, the wood already weathered by sand and sun. The driver was beyond help, had been for days. Graham searched the wreckage, finding nothing of use, no water barrels or food stores. The raiders had been thorough. But there were tracks leading away from the coach. Small tracks made by a woman's boot, heading due north into some of the most unforgiving territory in New Mexico. Graham studied them, noting how they wavered and stumbled, how they grew farther apart as if the person making them was staggering. "Damn fool direction to go," he muttered, but he followed them anyway. He tracked through the afternoon and into the evening, reading the story the sand told him. She had walked for days, this woman. Had rested in the shade of rocks during the hottest hours, then pushed on when the temperature dropped. She was strong or stubborn or both. But even strength had limits. He found her just as the stars were beginning to appear, a dark shape against darker sand. At first he thought she was dead, but when he knelt beside her, his canteen already in hand, he saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her face was burned and blistered, her lips cracked and bleeding, her eyes sunken deep in their sockets. She was barely alive, but she was alive. Graham lifted her head gently, cradling it in the crook of his arm, and dribbled water onto her lips. "Easy now," he said softly, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just a little at a time. Too much will make you sick." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open at the touch of water. She saw a face above her, strong-featured and concerned, haloed by stars. An angel, she thought. I am dead and this is an angel, but angels did not smell of horse sweat and leather. Angels did not have calloused hands that shook slightly as they held a canteen to cracked lips. She drank, coughing and sputtering, then drank again. "Slow," the angel said, and she realized he was a man, a living man with a deep voice roughened by the dry air. "You will make yourself sick." "More," she rasped, the words scraping out of her throat like broken glass. "Soon." "Let that settle first." He eased her head back down, then shrugged out of his jacket and rolled it into a makeshift pillow. "Can you tell me your name, Eleanor?" It was all she could manage, that single word. "Eleanor, I am Graham. You are safe now." He dampened a cloth from his canteen and began gently wiping the sand from her face. The touch was tender, careful, the gesture of a man who knew how fragile life could be in this harsh land. She wanted to ask him questions. How had he found her? Where was she? How far from Santa Fe? But exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide, and she felt herself sinking into unconsciousness. Despite her efforts to stay awake, Graham watched her drift off, noted the fluttering of her eyelids, the way her breathing deepened and steadied. She would live, he thought, if he could get her to water and shade. But they were still a day's ride from Placitas, the nearest town, and she was in no condition to sit a horse. He made camp there in the open desert, building a small fire to ward off the cold that came with nightfall. He made a shelter from his bedroll and spare blanket, propped up on sticks to give her protection from the wind. Every hour he woke her and made her drink, just a little, rebuilding what the desert had taken from her. In the moments when she was conscious enough to focus, Eleanor studied her rescuer. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this wilderness. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused but gentle when they touched her. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with lines around his eyes from squinting at distant horizons. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. "The stagecoach," she managed to say during one of these wakeful moments. "The driver." "I found him," Graham said quietly. "I am sorry. There was nothing anyone could have done. They came so fast." Her eyes filled with tears, though her body had no moisture to spare for crying. "He tried to run, but they shot the horses." "Apache," Graham said. "It was not a question." "Yes." I think so. They took everything. They left you alive. That was a mercy, though I doubt it felt like one. He helped her drink again, then settled back on his heels. Where were you headed? Santa Fe, she nodded. I was supposed to marry a man there, a merchant. We had been corresponding. A mail-order bride. He said it without judgment, simply stating a fact. Yes. She felt shame anyway, the old shame of being unwanted by her own family, of having to advertise herself like goods in a catalog. I know what people think of women who do such things. I think you are brave, Graham said, surprising her. It takes courage to travel across a country to build a new life with a stranger. Most people never move beyond the place they were born. The kindness in his words undid something in her chest, some tight knot she had been carrying since leaving Philadelphia. She began to cry in earnest then, tears tracking through the dust on her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Graham said nothing, just handed her his dampened cloth and looked away to give her privacy. He fed a few more sticks to the fire and checked on Copper, who was hobbled nearby, dozing on her feet. When Eleanor had collected herself, she said, "Thank you for finding me, for the water, for everything. Any decent person would have done the same, but you are the one who did." She looked at him across the small fire, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside her chest. Gratitude, certainly, but something else too, something that made her pulse quicken. Graham met her gaze and felt it too, that sudden awareness, that spark of connection. He looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the feeling. She was a woman spoken for, promised to another man. He had no right to whatever thoughts were forming in his mind. "You should rest," he said gruffly. "We have a long ride tomorrow." But sleep was difficult to find that night for both of them. They set out at dawn, Eleanor riding in front of Graham on Copper, his arms around her to hold the reins. She was still too weak to sit a horse alone, and he had no spare mount. The arrangement placed them in intimate proximity, her back against his chest, his breath stirring her hair. Neither spoke of it, but both were acutely aware. The ride to Placida's took most of the day. Graham kept the pace gentle, stopping frequently to let Eleanor drink and rest. He pointed out landmarks as they rode, teaching her to read the desert the way he did. "See that rock formation there, the one that looks like a church steeple? That is Old Man's Spire. If you are lost and you can see that, you are 20 miles south of Placida's." "How do you know all this?" Eleanor asked. "Been working ranches in this territory since I was 15 years old. You learn the land or you die in it. No middle ground." He shifted slightly in the saddle, adjusting his grip on the reins. "Where are you from originally? Back east somewhere by your accent." "Philadelphia." "But I was born in England. My parents brought me to America when I was 7. Long way from England to the New Mexico territory." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "My parents died 5 years ago, yellow fever. I lived with my brother after that, but his wife did not want me there. I was a burden, another mouth to feed, taking up space that could have been used for their children. So you answered an advertisement." "So I answered an advertisement." She felt the shame again, but pushed it away. "Marcus, my intended, he seemed kind in his letters. He wrote about his store, about the growing town, about wanting a partner to share his life with." Graham said nothing for a long moment. Then, carefully, "What if he is not what you expect? Then I will make the best of it. What choice do I have?" There was bitterness in her voice, the bitterness of someone who had learned that choices were a luxury not everyone could afford. "You always have choices, Eleanor. They might not be easy ones, but they exist." She wanted to believe him, but a lifetime of being told otherwise made it difficult. Instead, she changed the subject. "What about you? How did you come to be a cowboy in New Mexico?" "My father was a rancher in Texas. Died when I was young, and my mother could not keep the place running alone. She sold it and moved back east to live with her sister. I was already working other ranches by then, making my own way. Drifted west over the years following the work. He paused. I like it out here, the space, the quiet. Man can think in the desert or go mad in it. That too. She felt him smile against her hair, and the warmth of it spread through her chest. They rode in companionable silence after that, the steady rhythm of Copper's hooves marking time. Eleanor found herself relaxing into Graham's presence, feeling safer than she had since leaving Philadelphia. There was something solid about him, something dependable. She wondered what it would be like to build a life with a man like this, then immediately pushed the thought away. She was promised to Marcus Wright. This was a rescue, nothing more. But when Graham's arms tightened around her as they navigated a steep decline, when she felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back, she could not quite convince herself that her thoughts were as innocent as they should be. Placitas appeared like a mirage in the late afternoon heat, a collection of adobe buildings clustered around a dusty main street. It was small, maybe 200 people, but it had the essentials: a general store, a saloon, a church, a doctor's office. Graham guided Copper toward the doctor's house, a neat structure at the east end of town. Dr. Samuel Morrison was a gray-haired man with spectacles and gentle hands. He examined Eleanor while Graham waited outside, pacing the front porch like an expectant father. When the doctor emerged, he wore a cautiously optimistic expression. "She will recover," he said. "The dehydration was severe, and she has some nasty burns, but nothing permanent. She is young and strong. A few more days in that desert, though, and it would be a different story." He fixed Graham with a sharp look. "You saved her life. Just did what needed doing. Still, she is lucky you found her." The doctor gestured toward the door. "She should rest here for a few days. My wife will look after her, make sure she eats and drinks properly, give her body time to recover." Graham nodded, feeling an unexpected reluctance to leave. "I should get word to Santa Fe. Her intended husband should know she is alive." "Marcus Wright," she said, "the merchant." Dr. Morrison frowned slightly. "You know him." "I know of him. Runs a supply store there." "Why?" The doctor hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing. Just making sure I had the name right. I will send a telegram tomorrow." But Graham caught the hesitation, filed it away to examine later. "Can I see her before I go, briefly? She needs rest." Eleanor was lying in a clean bed in a small, whitewashed room. Someone had washed the sand from her hair and dressed her in a borrowed nightgown. She looked impossibly young and vulnerable, and Graham felt something clench in his chest at the sight of her. "Graham." She smiled when she saw him, a real smile that lit up her face despite the burns and blisters. "Dr. Morrison says I will live. That is good news." He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in his hands. "I am glad. He says I have you to thank for that. Like I said before, any decent person would have done the same. But you are the one who did." She repeated her words from the previous night, and the weight of them hung in the air between them. "Will you stay in Placitas? For a while. I need to get back to the Sullivan Ranch. Report back about the horses, do my work." He twisted his hat in his hands. "But I will check on you before I go. Make sure you have what you need. I do not even know how to repay you. No repayment necessary." He met her eyes across the room and felt that pull again, that dangerous attraction. "You just focus on getting well. Your intended husband will want to see you healthy when you reach Santa Fe." The mention of Marcus Wright fell between them like a stone. Eleanor's smile faltered. "Yes, of course." Graham left quickly after that, before he could say something he would regret. But as he rode Copper back toward the Sullivan Ranch, he found he could not stop thinking about Eleanor Jenkins, about the way she had felt in his arms on the ride to town, about the vulnerability in her eyes when she talked about having no choices. He told himself it did not matter. She was another man's intended. His job was done. He would collect his pay, move on to the next job, the next town. That was the life of a cowboy, always drifting, never putting down roots. But something had changed in those days tracking her through the desert, in those hours riding together toward Placitas. Something he could not quite name, but could feel like a physical ache in his chest. At the Sullivan Ranch, he gave his report to old Tom, explaining about losing the trail, about finding the wrecked stagecoach and the woman. Tom listened, nodding, his weathered face thoughtful. "You did right bringing her in," Tom said. "Horses can be replaced, a life cannot." He paid Graham his wages, then added a bonus. "For the rescue, take a few days in town if you want. You have earned it." Graham took the money and rode back to Placitas that same evening, telling himself it was because he had things to buy at the general store, repairs to make on his tack. But he knew the real reason. He could not leave, not yet. Not until he saw Eleanor safely on her way to Santa Fe. He got a room at the small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a kindly woman who asked no questions. He spent the next morning tending to Copper and his gear, then found himself walking toward the doctor's house without consciously deciding to do so. Eleanor was sitting on the porch when he arrived, wrapped in a shawl despite the heat. Her face was healing, the worst of the burns already fading to pink. She brightened when she saw him. "Graham, I thought you had gone back to your ranch." "I did. I came back." He climbed the porch steps, suddenly feeling foolish. What was he doing here? "Thought I would check on you. Make sure you were recovering well. As you can see, I am improving rapidly. Mrs. Morrison is taking excellent care of me." She gestured to the chair beside her. "Will you sit? Keep me company for a while." He should have said no, should have made his excuses and left. Instead, he sat. They talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing. She told him about her life in Philadelphia, about working as a seamstress to help support her brother's family, about reading books late into the night, stories of adventure in far-off places. He told her about life on the ranches, about the freedom of the open range, about nights spent under a canopy of stars so vast it made a man feel both insignificant and infinite at once. "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said wistfully. "That kind of freedom. I have never experienced anything like it." "It can be lonely," Graham admitted. "Always moving, never settling. You make friends, but then you move on. Everything is temporary." "Do you like it that way?" He considered the question. A week ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. Now, sitting here with Eleanor in the fading afternoon light, he was not so sure. "I thought I did. It was all I knew. But lately I have been thinking about what it would be like to stay somewhere, build something permanent." "What changed you?" he wanted to say. "Meeting you changed everything." But he could not say that, so instead he said, "Getting older, I suppose. A man starts to think about his legacy, about what he will leave behind when he is gone." Eleanor understood there was more he was not saying, but she did not push. Instead, she changed the subject, asking him about Placitas, about the people who lived here. He told her what he knew, painting a picture of a small community trying to build something in an unforgiving land. "It sounds nice," she said. "Much quieter than Philadelphia. Much quieter than what I imagined Santa Fe to be. You have never been there?" "No. Marcus sent a photograph of his store and he wrote about the town in his letters, but I have never seen it myself." She picked at a loose thread on her shawl. "I suppose I will soon enough." "The telegram went out this morning," Graham said quietly. "Dr. Morrison said so. Your intended should receive word in a day or two." "Oh," Eleanor's voice was small. "That is good. He must have been worried when the stage did not arrive." They fell into silence. both aware that her time in Placitas was limited, that soon she would leave for Santa Fe and the life that waited for her there. The thought sat between them like a third person, unwelcome and unavoidable. "Graham," Eleanor said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I do not want to go?" He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean? To Santa Fe? To marry Marcus Wright?" She met his gaze, and he saw fear there and something else, something that made his heart race. "What if I wanted to stay here instead, Eleanor?" He said her name like a warning, like a prayer. "You do not know what you are saying. You are still recovering, still shaken from your ordeal." "I know exactly what I am saying." Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "These past few days, talking with you, being here in this quiet little town, I have felt more at peace than I have in years. The thought of leaving, of going to a strange city to marry a man I have never met, it fills me with dread. But you made a commitment. He is expecting you." "I made a commitment out of desperation, not desire. And he is expecting a mail-order bride who will be grateful for whatever he offers. But I do not want to be grateful, Graham. I want to be happy." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Graham wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and promise her happiness, promise her everything. But he held himself in check, knowing that what he wanted and what was right might be two different things. "Your happiness matters, Eleanor, but you need to be certain. This is not a decision to make lightly. I know." She looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. "But when I think about my future, when I imagine what my life could be, you are in it, not Marcus Wright. You—" Graham felt the world tilt beneath him. "Eleanor, tell me you do not feel it too. Tell me I am imagining this connection between us, and I will go to Santa Fe and never speak of it again." He could not tell her that. He could not lie, not to her. "You are not imagining it. I feel it too. Have since that first night in the desert." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "But feeling something and acting on it are different things. You are promised to another man. I have nothing to offer you. No home, no security, just a cowboy's wages and a life of moving from place to place. I do not care about security. I care about being with someone who sees me, who talks to me like I am a person worth knowing. I care about feeling alive, Graham, and I have never felt more alive than I do when I am with you." He looked up at her then, and what he saw in her face made his breath catch. She was looking at him with such open longing, such vulnerable hope, that something inside him broke loose. "If you stay," he said slowly, carefully, "it will cause trouble. Wright will be angry. He paid your passage, made arrangements. People will talk. Let them talk. I will survive gossip. I will not survive a loveless marriage." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. The touch sent electricity up his arm. "I am asking you, Graham Hunter, if you want me to stay. Not if it is proper or right or sensible, just if you want it." And God help him, he did. He wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything in his life. "Yes," he said roughly. "Yes, I want you to stay. But Eleanor, you need to understand what you would be choosing. I do not have much. I work hard for my wages and I save what I can, but it is not an easy life. You would be giving up comfort, security. I would be choosing freedom," she corrected, "and I would be choosing you. That is enough." Graham brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture that felt both chaste and intimate. "Then stay. Please stay." The smile that broke across Eleanor's face was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. She leaned forward and kissed him, a brief press of lips that sent heat cascading through both of them. "I will stay," she whispered against his mouth. "I will stay." But staying, they would both discover, was more complicated than simply making the choice. The telegram from Marcus Wright arrived 2 days later. Dr. Morrison delivered it personally, his expression grave. "He is coming to Placitas," the doctor said, handing Graham the telegram. "He will be here in 3 days. Says he wants to assess his bride's condition personally and escort her back to Santa Fe himself. Graham read the telegram, his jaw tightening with each word. The tone was possessive, peremptory. Wright wrote as if Eleanor were a purchased item that had been damaged in shipping. He does not ask how she is, Graham said coldly. He does not express relief that she is alive. He wants to assess her condition. Yes, well. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. As I said before, I know of Marcus Wright. He is not a man who takes kindly to having his plans disrupted. She does not want to go with him. She told me as much. The doctor removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief, a nervous gesture. But legally, he has a claim. They had an agreement, conducted through letters and witnesses back east. If he chooses to enforce it, a judge might side with him. Even if she does not consent. Consent is a tricky thing when it comes to mail order arrangements. The law is not always on the side of the woman. He replaced his spectacles and looked Graham in the eye. I am not saying it is right. I am saying it is how things are. Graham felt rage building in his chest, hot and righteous. So what are you suggesting? That she has no choice? I am suggesting that you need to be prepared for trouble. Marcus Wright is a wealthy man with connections. You are a cowboy. In a legal battle, you would lose. The doctor's expression softened. But there are ways around legal battles if you are brave enough and quick enough. You mean leave before he arrives? I mean take the choice out of his hands entirely. Make it clear that there is no agreement to enforce because the parties involved are no longer available to negotiate. It was a radical suggestion, one that would effectively make them fugitives, or at least social pariahs. But Graham found he did not care. He had found something precious in Eleanor, something he had not known he was searching for. He would not give that up without a fight. I need to talk to her, he said. Eleanor was in the Morrisons' garden when Graham found her, tending to the tomato plants that Mrs. Morrison was so proud of. She looked healthy now. The desert's damage faded to nothing more than a light pink across her nose and cheeks. She looked beautiful, Graham thought. She looked like everything he had never known he wanted. Marcus Wright is coming, he said without preamble. He will be here in 3 days. Eleanor's hand stilled on the tomato plant. I see. Dr. Morrison says he might have legal standing to enforce your agreement. That a judge might make you go with him. Graham moved closer, taking her dirt-stained hands in his. But there is another option. We could leave, tonight. Head west toward Arizona Territory or south toward Mexico. Disappear before he arrives. You would do that. Leave your work, your life here, just to be with me. In a heartbeat. The words came easily, simple truth. But it is not a small thing I am asking, Eleanor. You would be giving up any chance of respectability. You would be marked as a woman who broke her word, who ran away from her obligations. It would be hard. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused, hers still soft despite the hardships of the past week. She thought about the life waiting for her in Santa Fe, the security and respectability Marcus Wright offered. Then she thought about the feeling of Graham's arms around her as they rode toward Placida's, the way he looked at her like she was precious, the way her heart raced when he smiled. When do we leave? She asked. Relief flooded through Graham so powerfully he felt dizzy with it. Tonight. As soon as it is full dark. Can you be ready? I have nothing to be ready with. Everything I owned was lost with the stagecoach. We will get supplies from the general store, traveling clothes, food, water, and I have money saved, not a fortune but enough to get us started somewhere new. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Are you certain, Eleanor? Once we do this, there is no going back. She tilted her face up to his, and he saw no doubt in her expression, only determination. I have never been more certain of anything. I choose you, Graham. I choose this. He kissed her then, properly, deeply, pouring all his hope and fear and desperate love into the contact. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. When they broke apart, both breathless, Graham rested his forehead against hers. "We should tell the Morrisons. They have been kind to us. They deserve to know." Dr. Morrison and his wife took the news with surprising calm. "I had a feeling something like this was coming," the doctor said. "The way you two look at each other, it is rather obvious." "We will leave tonight," Graham said. "I do not want to bring trouble to your door when Wright arrives." "Trouble will come regardless," Mrs. Morrison said practically, "but better you are far away when it does." She turned to Eleanor. "You will need proper clothes for traveling, dear. Come with me. I have some things that should fit you well enough." While the women went inside, Dr. Morrison pulled Graham aside. "There is something you should know about Marcus Wright. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances. Nothing was ever proven, but there were whispers. She fell down the stairs, supposedly, but she had been seen with bruises before. After she died, Wright made sure to find a bride from far away, someone who would not know his history." Cold anger settled in Graham's gut. "You are saying Eleanor was walking into danger?" "I am saying she is lucky the stagecoach was attacked in a terrible, roundabout way. Lucky that you found her. Lucky that she had a chance to know you before she knew him." The doctor clapped him on the shoulder. "You are doing the right thing, son. Do not doubt that." They left Placitas 3 hours after full dark, riding double on copper again, heading southwest. Graham had a plan of sorts. There was a ranch near the Arizona border, run by a man named Roberts who Graham had worked for years ago. Roberts was fair and honest and had no love for bullies like Marcus Wright. He would give them work, give them a chance to build something. Eleanor rode pressed against Graham's back, her arms around his waist, feeling safe despite the uncertainty of their future. They talked as they rode, making plans, dreaming out loud about the life they would build together. "I want a house," Eleanor said. "Nothing fancy, just something solid, with a garden where I can grow vegetables and flowers." "I can build you a house," Graham promised. "Might not be perfect at first, but I will keep improving it, adding to it, make it everything you want. As long as you are in it, it will be perfect." They rode through the night and into the next day, stopping only to rest the horse and refill their canteens at springs Graham knew. They saw no one, which was both a relief and a reminder of how vast and empty this country was. Out here, they were just 2 people among millions of miles of desert and mountain and sky. On the 3rd day, they reached the border between New Mexico and Arizona. Graham felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as they crossed that invisible line. They were out of Wright's immediate reach now, at least. "How much farther?" Eleanor asked. She was tired, he could tell, though she had not complained once. "Another day to the Roberts ranch. We can rest properly there, decide our next move." He squeezed her hand where it rested on his stomach. "You holding up all right?" "I am with you," she said simply. "That makes everything all right." They reached the Roberts ranch at sunset the following day. It was a sprawling operation, with a large main house and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Graham could see ranch hands moving about, finishing the day's work. John Roberts was a big man in his 50s with a gray beard and sharp blue eyes. He recognized Graham immediately and greeted him with a firm handshake. "Graham Hunter, been a while, son. What brings you out this way? Looking for work, if you have it, for both of us." Graham introduced Eleanor, explaining with careful honesty that they were hoping to make a new start. Roberts looked between them, reading the situation with the insight of someone who had lived through his own share of complications. "I've got work if you want it, and a small cabin on the East Range that needs occupants. Nothing fancy, but it is solid enough." "That sounds perfect," Eleanor said. "Well then, welcome to the Double R," Roberts smiled. "Let us get you settled in. You both look like you could use a good meal and a full night's sleep." The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and sturdy. There was a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed. Eleanor looked around and felt tears prick her eyes. It was the first place that had felt like home since her parents died. "It is perfect," she whispered. Graham came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "We will make it ours," he said. "Build a life here together, if that is what you want." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "It is what I want. You are what I want." He kissed her, slow and sweet, a promise of everything to come. "Marry me," he said against her lips. "Let me make you my wife properly and legally. Let me give you my name and my protection and everything I have." "Yes," Eleanor breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married the following week by a circuit judge who came through the area. It was a simple ceremony, with John Roberts and his wife standing as witnesses, but to Graham and Eleanor it felt sacred and perfect. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, when Graham kissed his bride for the first time as her husband, Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. This was where she was meant to be. This was home. The first months on the Double R were hard work but happy. Graham worked from dawn to dusk, riding fence lines, herding cattle, doing whatever Roberts needed. Eleanor made the cabin into a home, sewing curtains from fabric misses. Roberts gave her, planting a garden behind the house, learning to cook on the temperamental fireplace. They were blissfully happy, learning each other in all the ways that newlyweds do. Graham taught Eleanor to ride properly, taking her out on copper and showing her the vast beauty of the Arizona landscape. Eleanor taught Graham to read better, spending evenings by lamplight going through the books Mrs. Roberts loaned them. "I never thought I could have this," Graham said one night as they lay in bed, Eleanor tucked against his side. "I thought I was meant to be alone, just drifting through life without roots. But then I found you in that desert and everything changed." "You saved my life," Eleanor said softly. "In more ways than one. If you had not found me, if you had not given me the courage to choose my own path, I would be trapped in Santa Fe with a man who saw me as property. You would have found your own way eventually. You are stronger than you know, maybe. But I am glad I did not have to do it alone." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "I love you, Graham Hunter. I loved you from that first night in the desert when you were so gentle with me, so careful. I loved you when we rode to Placitas and you told me I always had choices. I loved you when you offered to run away with me even though it meant giving up everything you knew. I will love you every day for the rest of my life." Graham felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I love you too, Eleanor, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You are my home. You are my everything." They made love then, slow and tender, reaffirming the promises they had made to each other. But the past, they would discover, was not so easily outrun. 6 months after their arrival at the Double R, a stranger rode up to the ranch house asking for Graham Hunter. One of the ranch hands came to fetch him, and Graham felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Somehow, he knew this had something to do with Marcus Wright. The stranger was a lawyer from Santa Fe, a thin man in an expensive suit that looked completely out of place in the ranch yard. He handed Graham a folded document with an expression of professional neutrality. "Marcus Wright has filed suit against you for interference with contract and alienation of affection," the lawyer said. "He is seeking monetary damages and demanding that Eleanor Jenkins be returned to fulfill her obligations." Graham read the document, his jaw tightening with each word. "Eleanor Hunter," he corrected coldly. "My wife, and she has no obligations to Wright." She broke off their agreement before any legal union was formed. That is a matter for the courts to decide. You are hereby summoned to appear in Santa Fe in 30 days to answer these charges." The lawyer tipped his hat. "Good day, Mr. Hunter." Eleanor had come out of the cabin when she heard the commotion. She stood frozen, watching the lawyer ride away, her face pale. "He found us," she whispered. "Yes." Graham crumpled the summons in his fist. "But it does not matter. You are my wife. No court can change that. But he wants money." "Damages." "Graham, we do not have that kind of money." "Then we will fight it. We will hire our own lawyer, prove that you broke the agreement in good faith, that there were no damages because Wright lost nothing of real value." He pulled her close, feeling her tremble against him. "I will not let him take you from me, Eleanor. I swear it." John Roberts, when informed of the situation, was outraged. "Marcus Wright is a snake. Everyone knows it, but no one wants to stand against him because he has money and influence." He thought for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I know a good lawyer in Tucson, Samuel Brennan. He does not care about a man's money or position, only about what is right. I will send for him." Samuel Brennan arrived at the Double R 5 days later. He was a young man, barely 30, with intelligent eyes and a quick mind. He listened to Graham and Eleanor's story carefully, asking pointed questions, taking notes. "The core of Wright's case is the breach of promise," Brennan said finally. "He will argue that he spent money on your passage, on preparations for your arrival, on the expectation of a marriage that Eleanor willfully abandoned. To counter that, we need to prove that Eleanor had just cause to break the agreement. Specifically, we need to prove that Wright misrepresented himself, that she would have been in danger had she married him. Dr. Morrison in Placitas mentioned that Wright's first wife died under suspicious circumstances," Graham said. "That there were whispers about her having bruises, about the fall that killed her being suspicious. Whispers are not evidence, but they are a starting point." Brennan made another note. "I will need to interview people who knew Wright and his first wife. Build a case that he was not a suitable husband, that Eleanor was right to refuse him." "Will that be enough?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Honestly, I do not know. A lot will depend on the judge, on how sympathetic he is to your position." Brennan looked at her with kind eyes. "But I promise you this. I will fight as hard as I can. You deserve to live your life on your own terms." The next weeks were tense. Brennan traveled to Santa Fe to conduct his investigation while Graham and Eleanor tried to continue their normal lives. But the upcoming trial hung over them like a storm cloud, poisoning their happiness with constant worry. "What if we lose?" Eleanor asked one night. "What if the judge orders me to go with Wright? Then we run again. As far as we need to, I will not let you go, Eleanor. Not ever. But I do not want us to spend our lives running. I want to build a home, start a family, live in peace." Her voice broke. "Why will he not just leave us alone?" "Because men like Wright do not like to lose. It is not really about you, not anymore. It is about his pride, his need to win." Graham took her hands, his grip firm and reassuring. "But we will get through this, together, no matter what happens." The trial was held in Santa Fe on a sweltering day in August. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers, people who had heard about the scandalous case of the runaway mail-order bride. Graham and Eleanor sat at the defendant's table with Samuel Brennan, facing Marcus Wright and his expensive legal team across the aisle. Graham got his first look at Marcus Wright and felt his dislike intensify into something stronger. Wright was a man in his early 40s, well-dressed and prosperous-looking, with cold eyes and a tight mouth. He looked at Eleanor the way someone might look at a horse that had thrown them with anger and a desire to break. Wright's lawyers presented their case first. They painted Eleanor as a deceitful woman who had accepted Wright's money and promises in bad faith, who had conspired with Graham to defraud their client. They produced the letters Eleanor had written, pointed to the expenses Wright had incurred, demanded compensation for his losses and his damaged reputation. Then it was Brennan's turn. He called witness after witness, people who had known Wright and his first wife Abigail. A shopkeeper who had seen Abigail with bruises she claimed came from Clumsy Falls. A neighbor who had heard arguments, shouting, the sound of things breaking. A doctor who had been called to treat Abigail for various injuries and who admitted, reluctantly, that her explanations had not always made sense. "Did you report your suspicions?" Brennan asked the doctor. "No, I had no proof, and Mr. Wright is an influential man. I did not think anyone would believe me over him." "But you believe Mrs. Wright was being abused?" Objection. Wright's lawyer shot to his feet. "The witness cannot testify to something he cannot prove." "I withdraw the question." Brennan turned to the judge. "But I think the pattern is clear, Your Honor. Marcus Wright has a history of violence toward women. Eleanor Hunter had every reason to break their agreement when she learned of this history. She was not acting in bad faith. She was acting in self-preservation." The judge, a stern older man named Collins, looked thoughtful. "Mr. Wright, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Wright stood, his face red with anger. "These are lies and rumors, Your Honor. My first wife's death was a tragic accident, nothing more. And even if there were some truth to these claims, Miss Jenkins had no knowledge of them when she broke our agreement. She ran off with this cowboy for purely selfish reasons." "Mrs. Hunter," Eleanor said clearly, her voice ringing through the courtroom, "my name is Mrs. Hunter, and I ran off with this cowboy because I fell in love with him, because he treated me with kindness and respect, because when I looked at my future with him, I saw happiness, not obligation. Love." Wright spat the word like a curse. "You broke a legal agreement for something as frivolous as love." "There is nothing frivolous about love, Mr. Wright, and there is nothing legal about an agreement made under false pretenses. You presented yourself as a kind, lonely widower. You did not tell me that people whispered about how your first wife died. You did not tell me that you saw me as property to be acquired, not a partner to be cherished. You had no right to make that judgment without even meeting me. I had every right to choose my own future." Eleanor stood now, facing Wright across the courtroom. "You think you can own me because you paid for my stagecoach passage. You think I owe you my life because we exchanged letters. I owe you nothing, Marcus Wright, and I would rather die in that desert than spend one day as your wife." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Collins banged his gavel for order, but Graham could see the hint of a smile on the old man's face. "That is quite enough," Collins said. "I will take this matter under advisement and render my decision tomorrow morning." That night, Graham and Eleanor barely slept. They lay together in their hotel room, holding each other, preparing themselves for whatever came next. "If we have to run," Eleanor said, "I am ready, as long as we are together." "We will always be together," Graham promised, "no matter what." The courtroom was even more packed the next morning. Judge Collins entered, looking grave, and everyone fell silent. "I have considered the arguments and evidence presented in this case," Collins began, "and I have reached a decision. Mr. Wright, I find your claim to have merit in the narrowest legal sense. Miss Jenkins, as she was then, did enter into an agreement with you and then failed to fulfill that agreement." Eleanor's hand tightened on Graham's. This was it. They were going to lose. "However," Collins continued, "I also find that the agreement was made under false pretenses. You did not disclose relevant information about your character and history, information that any reasonable person would consider material to the decision of whether to enter into such an arrangement. Furthermore, The evidence suggests that Miss Jenkins would have been in potential danger had she proceeded with the marriage. Wright's face went purple with rage. Your Honor, this is outrageous. You cannot possibly believe these vicious rumors over my sworn testimony. I can and I do. The pattern of evidence is too consistent to ignore. Collins fixed Wright with a stern look. Your claim is dismissed, Mr. Wright. Mrs. Hunter owes you nothing. She made a choice to protect herself, and the law will not punish her for that. As for your reputation, such as it is, I suspect it was already damaged long before this trial. Relief flooded through Graham so powerfully he thought he might be sick. Beside him, Eleanor began to cry, great heaving sobs of joy and release. Furthermore, Collins continued, I am issuing a restraining order. You are not to contact or approach Mrs. Hunter in any way. If you do, you will face charges. Do I make myself clear? Perfectly, Wright said through gritted teeth. He stormed from the courtroom without another word, his lawyers hurrying after him. Brennan turned to Graham and Eleanor with a broad smile. You are free, truly free. Graham pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her tight. It is over, he whispered into her hair. It is finally over. They stayed in Santa Fe one more day to finalize the paperwork, then began the journey back to the Double R. But this time, the ride felt different. There was no fear, no looking over their shoulders. They were free to build the life they wanted, and the knowledge of that was sweeter than anything Graham had ever tasted. What are you thinking about? Eleanor asked as they rode. The future. Our future. I want to save up enough to buy our own piece of land someday. Nothing huge, just enough for a small ranch. Raise some cattle, some horses. Build you that house I promised. That sounds wonderful, and maybe we could fill that house with children if you want that. Graham's heart swelled. I want that more than anything. A house full of children with your smile and stubbornness. And your kindness and strength, Eleanor added. She leaned back against him, content. I love you, Graham. I love you too, Eleanor. Always. The years that followed were everything they had hoped for and more. Graham continued working for John Roberts while saving every penny he could spare. Eleanor took in sewing work, her skill with a needle earning her a reputation throughout the territory. Slowly but surely, they built their savings. 2 years after the trial, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. Graham was overjoyed, fussing over her like a mother hen, making her rest, insisting she not work too hard. She tolerated his hovering with good-natured patience, knowing it came from love. Their son was born on a cool autumn evening, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Thomas, after Graham's father, and he had Eleanor's dark hair and Graham's green eyes. He is perfect, Graham whispered, holding his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face. You are perfect. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for giving me this. We made him together, Eleanor said softly. We made this beautiful life together. When Thomas was 3, they had saved enough to buy their own land. It was a small parcel, just 200 acres in a valley with good water, but it was theirs. Graham built them a house, working on it every moment he was not tending their small herd of cattle. It was not large or fancy, but it was solid and warm and exactly what Eleanor had dreamed of. They moved in on a bright spring day, carrying Thomas through the door of their new home. Eleanor stood in the empty main room, looking around at the space they would fill with life and love and laughter, and felt such profound happiness that it took her breath away. This is it, she said. This is everything I never knew I wanted. Graham wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. We have come a long way from that desert, have we not? A lifetime away. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. Do you ever regret it? tracking me through that desert, saving me, turning your whole life upside down. Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Hunter. You and Thomas and this life we have built. I would not change a single moment. 2 years later, their daughter was born. A tiny, delicate girl they named Abigail, after no one in particular, but simply because they liked the name. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Thomas adored her, playing the role of protective older brother with endearing seriousness. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Graham had a gift for ranching, an instinct for where to graze the cattle, when to buy and sell, how to manage the land. Eleanor kept their home, raised their children, and continued her sewing business. Now, out of a sunny room Graham had added to the house specifically for that purpose. They made friends among the other ranchers in the valley, becoming part of a community in a way Graham had never experienced during his drifting cowboy days. They attended barn raisings and church socials, shared meals with neighbors, helped each other through hard times. When Thomas was 8 and Abigail was 6, Eleanor became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2 and Graham worried constantly. But on a snowy December night, she delivered twin boys, healthy and strong, both with Graham's dark hair. They named them Samuel, after the lawyer who had saved them, and David, simply because Eleanor had always loved the name. With 4 children, the house that had once seemed spacious now felt cozy and full. "Our quiver is full," Graham joked as he held both twins, one in each arm while Thomas and Abigail clustered around to see their new brothers. "It certainly is," Eleanor agreed, watching her family with a heart so full of love it felt like it might burst. "I think 4 is quite enough, do not you?" 4 is perfect. The years continued to roll by, marked by birthdays and holidays, by first steps and first words, by the thousand small joys and challenges of family life. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible young man who showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps as a rancher. Abigail was spirited and imaginative, always spinning stories and dreaming of adventures beyond their valley. The twins were inseparable, 2 halves of a whole, constantly getting into mischief and charming their way out of punishment with identical grins. Graham and Eleanor watched their children grow with pride and wonder. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch Graham had built, looking out over the land they had built together. "You remember that first night in the desert?" Eleanor asked one such evening. "When you found me and gave me water?" "I remember everything about that night. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, still alive after days in that desert." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in a gesture that had become habit over the years. "I remember the moment I fell in love with you, right there in the sand under the stars. I fell in love with you too that night. Even though I was half dead and delirious, I knew you were special. I knew you were going to change my life." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Best thing that ever happened to me getting lost in that desert. Best thing that ever happened was you finding me. Best thing that ever happened to me was having the sense to go looking." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Eleanor, today, tomorrow, and every day after that for as long as we both shall live. I love you too, Graham, always." They sat there in the gathering darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life out of love and determination and stubborn hope. Behind them, in the house they had built together, their children slept safe and warm. Around them, the land they had carved out of wilderness stretched into the night. Above them, the same stars that had witnessed their first night together shone down with ancient light. The years continued their inexorable march. Graham's hair turned gray, then white. Eleanor's face gained lines, each one earned through years of laughter and worry and love. Their children grew up, built lives of their own. Thomas took over the ranch, working it alongside his father until Graham finally retired. Abigail married a schoolteacher and moved to Phoenix, where she wrote stories for magazines and raised 3 children of her own. Samuel became a lawyer, following in the footsteps of the man he was named for. David became a doctor, dedicated to serving the rural communities that had so few medical resources. Graham and Eleanor became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their house always filled with the chaos and joy of visiting family. They told their grandchildren stories of the old days, of the Wild West that was slowly being tamed, of a time when the land was vast and dangerous and full of possibility. But their favorite story was always the same, the story of how they met. Of a mail-order bride lost in the desert, and the cowboy who tracked her for days and found her. Of love discovered in the least likely place, under the least likely circumstances. Of 2 lonely people who found each other and built something beautiful. Was it love at first sight? Their youngest granddaughter asked one summer afternoon. She was 6, with Abigail's dark hair and Graham's green eyes, the latest in a long line of children who carried pieces of them forward into the future. Graham and Eleanor looked at each other, sharing a smile that held decades of shared history. It was love at first rescue, Graham said. It was love at first chance, Eleanor added. It was love, they said together, and it was forever. As the sun set over the ranch they had built, over the life they had created through sheer force of will and love, Graham pulled Eleanor close. She fit against him perfectly, the way she always had, the way she always would. Their great-granddaughter ran off to play with her cousins, already forgetting the old people and their ancient story. But the story was not forgotten. It lived on in the house they had built, in the land they had tended, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood. It lived on in every sunset watched from that porch, in every star that shone above the New Mexico desert, in every person who dared to choose love over security, hope over fear. Graham and Eleanor lived to see their 60th wedding anniversary, surrounded by more family than they had ever dreamed possible. When Graham passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 90, Eleanor held his hand and whispered that she would see him soon. She followed him 6 months later, on a spring morning that smelled of wildflowers and rain. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription. They found each other in the desert and built a paradise. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood at their graves and told the story again, the way it had been told 100 times before, the way it would be told 100 times hence. The story of a mail-order bride lost in the desert, and the cowboy who tracked her for days and found her, and the love that bloomed between them like a flower in the sand, impossible and perfect and eternal. And in the telling and the retelling, Graham and Eleanor lived on, their love a testament to the enduring power of choosing your own path, of finding hope in desperate circumstances, of believing that even in the harshest wilderness, even when all seems lost, love can find a way. Their story became legend in that valley, passed down through generations, a reminder that the greatest adventures are not always the ones we plan, but the ones that find us when we are lost. That sometimes the worst circumstances lead to the best outcomes. That love, real love, is worth fighting for, worth running for, worth building a whole life around. The ranch prospered under Thomas's care, then under his sons, then under his grandsons, each generation adding their own chapter to the story but never forgetting the foundation. The house Graham built still stood, expanded and modernized but still fundamentally the same, still filled with the echoes of the love that had created it. And sometimes, on quiet desert nights when the stars shone bright and the wind whispered through the scrub brush, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand across the land, a tall man and a determined woman, forever young, forever in love, forever together. It was just a story, of course, a romantic notion. But then again, so was the idea that a cowboy could track a dying woman through miles of desert and find her just in time. So was the idea that love could bloom in such impossible circumstances. So was the idea that two people who should never have met could build a life that would echo through generations. But it had happened. All of it had happened. And in a way, it was still happening. Every time someone told the story, every time someone chose love over fear, every time someone looked at the vast desert and saw not emptiness but possibility, Graham and Eleanor's love story did not end with their deaths. It lived on in every sunset, in every star, in every person who dared to hope for something better. It lived on in the very land itself, in the ranch they had built, in the family they had created, in the legacy of love they had left behind. And that, in the end, was the greatest testament of all. Not that they had loved, but that their love had mattered, that it had changed things, that it had made the world in its own small way a better place. 70 years after Graham found Eleanor in that desert, their great-great-granddaughter stood on the porch of the house Graham had built and looked out over the land as the sun set. She was getting married tomorrow, marrying a man she loved with her whole heart, and she found herself thinking about her ancestors, about the impossible love story that had started her family. She thought about Eleanor, lost and dying in the desert, choosing to keep walking when it would have been easier to give up. She thought about Graham, following tracks through the sand, refusing to stop until he found what he was searching for even though he had not known he was searching for it. She thought about the choice Eleanor had made in Placitas, to run away with a cowboy instead of fulfilling her obligation to a man she did not love. She thought about the courage that choice had taken, the faith it had required. And she understood, standing there in the golden light of sunset, that love was always a choice, always a risk, always a leap into the unknown. But it was a leap worth taking because on the other side was everything that mattered: connection, family, home, belonging. Tomorrow she would marry her love, and she would build her own story, her own legacy. But she would do it standing on the foundation Graham and Eleanor had laid, carrying their courage forward into her own life. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The desert wind whispered through the grass. And the house that love had built stood strong and solid, ready for another generation, another chapter, another love story to unfold within its walls. Graham and Eleanor's story was complete, their circle closed, their love proven and tested and triumphant. They had found each other in the desert, built a life in the wilderness, and left behind something that would endure long after they were gone. It was a good story, a true story, a love story for the ages. And it all began with one desperate woman lost in the desert, and one determined cowboy who refused to stop looking until he found her. In the end, that was all any of us could ask for: to be found when we were lost, to be loved when we were lonely, to build something that mattered, to leave the world better than we found it. Graham and Eleanor had done all that and more. Their love story was complete, and it was beautiful, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.